Hello there once again, fellow peregrinos. Welcome to El Camino de Santiago Pilgrims podcast, where we talk about planning, preparation and packing for walking the road to Santiago, El Camino de Santiago, as well as tips, tricks and hacks to make your journey along the way a lot more enjoyable. This week we're talking to Jason Searl from the USA. Jason, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Bradley. I appreciate it.
And Jason, please take us back to the time and place where you first decided to walk the Camino de Santiago and tell us why.
Yeah, terrific. So a little background on me might be appropriate to understand. We have 5 kids, my wife Chrissy and I do, and I've went pretty hard in a commodities trading business for a lot of years in the energy sector, and did that for over 20 years, helped to build a small business that became a pretty large business. And in 2014, at a very young age, I was at the point where I was able to take a look and take stock, if you will, of where I was at, and decided maybe there's a different way to approach life than just staring at 5 or 6 computer screens and running a trading business that I was kind of married to for all practical purposes. And looked around and talked to my wife Chrissy for a long time before making that decision about what are we supposed to be, what are we supposed to do, and kind of what's our purpose. And she'd done an amazing job raising these kids, and at the time our kids were still relatively young. Our oldest was a sophomore in high school, so about 16 years old, and maybe 15 at the time. And the younger ones were 9 and 10 years old, or around that age. So I still had some time with them, and I said, "Gee, we had these 5 kids, and Chris, you've been raising them all on your own, and I kind of." Drive the engine, the economic engine that makes us go, and no problem with that. But we got to the point where we were pretty well taken care of, and said, hey, maybe there is more to life than just doing this. And kind of ran off the cliff, if you will, and just said, I'll figure out if there's a next and what next is supposed to look like, and decided to retire at a very young age at 43 years old, and looked at, hey, we're kind of built for adventure. I don't think we were really built to work in cubicles and offices and stare at computer screens. I don't know that that's super healthy, and that's not to knock what many of us have to do to pay the bills, and it's certainly a noble way to go about our business. But I just think through evolution, that's not where we were supposed to end up. So I decided to, go try and carve out a living in a different way. And when I said retire, it wasn't just, hey, I'm not going to go not work and go play golf and just travel all over the world, but I'm going to try and enjoy my kids' time while I've got it, and work in a different way. And volunteered for a lot of not-for-profits, the several boards of directors that I'd been on, and all that kind of thing. Really got involved in those businesses and those not-for-profits, and rolled up my sleeve and worked differently. And so that allowed me a lot of free time, at which point I kind of learned. I'd always heard of the Camino and was raised Catholic, and was familiar with it, with what it meant. But we had done, just a couple weeks after I decided that it was time for me to walk away, we have a little pilgrimage here at the U.S., and we can talk about this later, but it's a 60-mile walk, and it walks from Wichita, Kansas, which is kind of the center of the U.S. here. It's right in the middle of the U.S., and we walk from our large metropolitan area church here up to a very small rural town called Pilsen, Kansas, named after the town in the Czech Republic, Pilsen, where all these Czechs had immigrated from. And there's really a purpose for that walk each year. And again, we can go into that later, but I grabbed a couple of my kids and we walked that, and some family friends, and we did this pilgrimage here. And then shortly after that, the wheels started turning, and I looked at my son Matthew and said, hey, what would it look like if we went on this Camino? And would it be something that you'd be up for? And so 2016, Matthew and I, we did the Camino Frances, and was just astonishing on what that did for us together, and him as a young man, and
how old was Matthew, by the way?
So he had just turned 17 years old when we did it, and which your listeners will know, you don't see a lot of people that age until you probably get to Sarria, and then you start running into a lot of younger people, but for the most part, it's relatively mature folks that are out there. So Matthew doing the whole thing from St. Jean all the way to Santiago, he was kind of a novelty back then, especially in the early stages of the Camino, as people would run into him. It was pretty neat to watch him, grow. And here in the U.S., I don't mean to go on a diatribe, but we're kind of somewhat centered on our own thinking in terms of a U.S.-centric world, and our view is a little bit more narrow than our European relatives and folks that are, from different areas of the world. And I had the great fortune of, in my college years, I got to go over to Europe and study. It was actually banging away on the Berlin Wall when it came down, the summer after it came down, and studied over there. And at a young age had what I thought was a little bit larger worldview than some of my friends here in the U.S. that had never been outside of the U.S. And so traveling around and understand the world's a little bigger place for me was a big impact of my life at a young age. It's something I wanted to give all my kids. And, that's really what the intent with Matthew was show them that the world's a bigger place. There's interesting people from all over, and get him exposed to that, and let him be comfortable operating outside of just here in the States. And you guys are, I think all of our friends that we meet from overseas, from South America, from anywhere else, those country lines are. You just get a lot more exposure to different cultures than you may here in the U.S. And that's a really neat benefit of being over there in Europe or somewhere else in the world where we're a little bit more probably homogenous here and don't have the depth of culture, just because the country's not as old as our relatives from overseas, right? I mean,
also,
your history is so much greater. So I wanted to give that to him, and that was great.
Yeah, it sounds like you thought you'd enroll him in the Camino University before he goes off to the real university, right?
Right. That was it, exactly.
There's no better education, I think, than a month on the Camino.
Well said.
I, in my opinion, I mean, obviously, I've been to school, as you call it in the US, don't you? We call it university here. But I mean, just to touch on that notion, that idea that you're in the US, it maybe doesn't have as much history, but I think as well, I spent quite a bit of time in the US, and one of the good things about the US is it has everything. It's got beaches, it's got mountains, it's got snow, it's got amazing national parks, and in your country you have everything that a person could need to see and visit and experience. And that's why I think many people don't feel the need to travel outside of their own borders. But when you do, obviously, you see there is so much more out there. I mean, for me personally, I had the time of my life in America, and probably I love Americans as well, because I always feed off their enthusiasm. And I'm not just saying that because 51% of my listeners are American. I'm saying it because I had the time of my life in America, and
I couldn't agree with you anymore.
Just the enthusiasm is amazing. I went back to, and I'll get off my diatribe now, but I went back to do a triathlon in New York City a couple of years ago, and I hadn't been in America for about 8 to 9 years, and just remember this guy. He was probably in his 70s, something like that, and standing in Central Park at 8 o'clock in the morning, cheering me on. I didn't know this guy from Adam. He's going, "Come on, man, you can do it." And I'm like, this guy doesn't even know me, and he's cheering for me like he's my own father, and I love that enthusiasm about Americans, and I think that's what you bring to us Europeans, if I can, put
Well,
it on the
that's
other
great
foot.
to hear.
What you got, what we bring to you in terms of the history and the culture, that's what you bring to us, and especially us tight-lipped Brits. We love a bit of that. We do love a bit of that. So it sounds like you obviously you got the taste from the Camino from your Catholic upbringing. Maybe that's when you first heard about it, and you cut your teeth a little bit for the Camino and in that pilgrimage route that's closer to home. You've gone on the pilgrimage with your son Matthew, and for that first pilgrimage, Jason, did you do any training? Was there anything that you did to prepare that you'd recommend others do?
Yeah, we did, and I've listened to several of your podcasts, and there's some consistent themes out there. And what I'd say is don't approach it cold. I mean, you have to prep, and I say that the Camino is kind of where the physical, the mental, and the spiritual all kind of connect. And at the end of the day, it's the whole concept of pilgrimage is really, this journey to the tomb of St. James the Apostle, and that's not why everybody does it. But what I found out there is kind of in preparation as well. I mean, you just got to get used to doing the miles or the kilometers, and so that physical piece and the mental piece is really, really big. And so we walked quite a bit. We tried all kinds of different shoes, and both of us went through 3 or 4 different brands and types of shoes, and tried to figure out, hey, what's the best one and what's going to be waterproof and all of that kind of thing, and just tried to get as many miles as we could. And certainly this walk from Wichita to Pilsen, that's 60 miles in 3 days, and so that's those are 3 huge Camino days. So doing all of that, we carried our packs. We had our packs weighed at about what we were going to carry on the Camino, all of that. And when we did our second one, my wife and I did the same thing. Kind of went through a bunch of shoes and then had our packs. You get them fitted, and then walk with the weight that you're going to walk with if you can. You look a little bit absurd walking around your community with a big backpack, and your neighbors look at you kind of funny, but I think everybody kind of rallies behind you too, that when they ask some questions, hey, why are you walking with your pack? You tell them a little bit about the Camino, which all of us Camino veterans, we can't help ourselves from talking about it. And people enjoy the story. So I'd say just get your steps in, and also those longer walks. When you're out there, I describe it as, you're in your own head, even if you're walking with somebody. I know you walked with your wife, and I walked with my wife, my son, and that kind of thing. But you're inside your own head, and you got to get comfortable in your own head. So some of that training is probably good. Good reps just to get in before you get out there, because it is so it is strenuous. It's not a walk in the park. It's not easy.
I mean, you touched a little bit on the physical preparation there, which you stress the importance of getting in some longer walks with a weighted pack, which echoes the advice and the practical steps that many of our previous guests have taken as well. But how would you say would be a good way to prepare mentally for the Camino, for being out there, for walking so far for so many hours every day?
So Bradley, that's an excellent question. And I've listened to a lot of podcasts, yours and others, and you always hear everybody just say, hey, just go do it. If you're thinking about it, go do it. And I don't know that I subscribe to that advice. I mean, because of the mental piece, I think you really got to have a why and figure out what your why is and your reason to walk it. And it's wonderful. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I would encourage everybody to figure out if it's for them. But I was out there with a lot of people, that I met along the way, and saw people that were leaving from the Camino as you'd talk to them. And it was very clear, everybody that was leaving that just kind of gave up on it. It was a hot year when I walked in 2016. It was unseasonable, just very, very hot, close to 100 degrees US, Fahrenheit. I don't know I can't do the math in my head for Celsius, but it was a very, very hot summer, and we walked it in the summer. So I think mentally and physically it was taking a toll on some people, and it wasn't people ejecting left and right. I don't mean to leave that impression, but there were several people out there that we talked to that just, they didn't find it. It wasn't resonating with them. It wasn't, and I don't think they were mentally prepared. And that mental each day, just one foot in front of the other, keep going. And there is a little bit of monotony. It's not all romance out there, although the sights, sounds, food, I love all of that. But at the end of the day, you're walking a lot. And if you don't mentally have that kind of edge or preparation for it, or have a purpose for doing it, why are you out here? What are you trying to figure out about yourself? I think some of those questions are good to ponder before you get there and just jump into the deep end of the pool.
So you'd recommend people make sure they have, well, not make sure, but where possible, they've got maybe an idea clear in their head of something they're trying to get some clarity on.
Well, and it's not, I've got to figure out X, Y, Z about myself. Maybe it is just a spirit of adventure and this spirit of, I want to experience a different culture, and all those are great. Those are great reasons. But I think there's a lot of people that just kind of say, well, I heard about this, I just got to do it. And I hear a lot of advice, just, hey, just go. And that might work for some people, but if you don't prepare and try and understand a little bit about the history and the why of the Camino and the spirit of the Camino and kind of the hospitality elements and some of those things that you encounter out there, if it turns out to be just a rather long walk, I saw people kind of offboarding at some of the major towns where I'm catching the bus and going back to real life now.
I mean, it's interesting because the words that I plucked out of what you said was the monotony. It can be challenging, and I, for example, I don't know if you can relate to this, maybe somewhere in the Meseta, but where you have portions of the trail where there's no towns and no villages to take a break in, and I really found those parts of the trail at times quite hard because, for example, on the Portuguese Camino between Lisbon and Porto, the first part, there are stretches of like 20, 30K where there's nothing and it's just flat and walking through fields and actually quite tough. And I found those days not as enjoyable as the ones where you've got maybe cafes that you look forward to getting at and taking your café con leche and your tortilla or whatever and your bocadillo, your sandwich. And so... yeah, I found that quite challenging at first. How was that element for you and your son?
That's. I'm really glad you brought that up, Bradley. I've described this to many people that I talk to. Like, there's several sub Caminos within the Camino, and there's kind of that first part that's, through Burgos, the first, dozen days or so, depending on how fast you walk it, or that it's the newness of the Camino, and it's the terrain varies, like you said, we have here in America. That's kind of a part of the Camino where you get all this varying terrain that's really neat, and it's new, it's fresh. You're kind of getting acclimated. You're going through big towns, small, big cities, small towns, all that, and then boom, at Burgos you get into the Meseta. Well, that's my wheelhouse. That's I live in Kansas, in the geographic center of the U.S., the breadbasket of the world. We're the Great Plains, and so me, it was home. And
wow.
Out on the Meseta, though, it was myself and Matthew and 5 or 6 other people. There was some friends that we had from Belgium that took off from Brussels, from the cathedral in Brussels, and walked, all the way to St. Jean. And these guys were just amazing. They were out there trucking along on the Meseta with us. But we ran into virtually nobody out there. And the year that we did the Camino was a record year in 2016. And the amount of people that took buses out of Burgos and just skipped that, going to either Leon or Astorga, just I'm going to skip the Meseta because of that. But I loved it, the solitude out there, and that, I said, you kind of got to be willing to be inside your own head. Those were some of my son had terrible blisters the entire way till we got to, almost to Villafranca del Bricio. He really, his feet really started to heal. So about 2/3 of his Camino, just terrible blisters. And we were out there in the Meseta, hot day on a Sunday morning, and we were about 5 kilometers away from a town. I can't remember what it was, and his feet had just blown up, and we had run out of Compeed, and I was lancing his blisters and taking care of his feet on the side of the road. And this pilgrim walks up from Germany who, we became great friends. Her name was Dagma, and she had some compete. We took her up on her offering of that to us. And I told Matt, let's grab a cab to this town. And he said, no, Dad, I'm walking every step of the way. I said, what's the matter? So many people have skipped this entire section, and it's our Camino. It doesn't matter. Yeah, it's not about going every step. And he said, well, for me it is. I just want to know I walked every step of this thing, and through tears and how hard that section was for him, he toughed it out and became a pilgrim. It's like, okay, that's your pilgrimage, and but out there we loved it, and that solitude out there was wonderful. We felt at home. But there's a lot of people that we met that was it for them, and where they were offboarding from the Camino, it didn't make any more sense to them. And again, I want to be careful because I don't want to convey this to your listeners. It's not like 1 out of every 3 pilgrims is not finding it out there. I'd say the vast majority of people enjoy their experience out there. But we met some people that we were surprised that were just great personalities, fun, teaching yoga at the albergues a couple of nights. And, and then after a couple of days, it just wasn't gelling with them. And they that's what they expressed to us. It's just not doing it for me out here, sort of thing. So you got to mentally be ready to just go for it.
Yeah. I mean, so the mental and the physical preparation, obviously really, really important. And nothing, like we said before, can prepare you for walking so far, so many days in a row. And obviously Matthew, bless him, and thank you to Dagmar, wherever you are in Germany, for helping. And so he had some blisters. Now, how did he, if you said by the time you got to Villafranca del Bierzo, he was kind of over it, was it just Compeed, or did you have any other way to help cure the blisters? Because we often talk about prevention, but once they're not always inevitable. How did you cure them? What advice would you give for those who suffer?
Yeah, so we lanced them, and just with the sewing needle, you leave the thread in to help it drain. You Compeed, tape, our various methods. Moleskin is another one that's kind of like a more robust KT tape. So we just doctored his feet each day, and I don't care what kind of shape you're in. My brother-in-law, my sister walked it a couple years after us. He's an Ironman triathlete, tough, Marine, as tough as they get. And he walked to Pamplona and he exploded. He was just mentally like done, and he's in shape, but your body just isn't attuned to walking that much every day. And coming up over the Pyrenees and how tough that was, and there's some sketchy parts. I don't know that I just got back from it this fall, and I didn't recall even having been there a couple of years earlier, like those day 2 and 3 of the Camino, some of those shale descents, through those sections where it's kind of loose shale cuts that are, if there's a little bit of moisture out there, it's not easy walking, right? And having poles and everything are very important. Take your weight and take the weight off your knees and everything. It's, so it's an arduous walk. People got to understand that.
Yeah, I mean, we had an ex-US Marine a couple of episodes ago, Peter Goodmanson, if you're listening. Hi, Peter. And he mentioned that he had a stop and inspect protocol. So even if it was the slightest little hot spot, the smallest little kind of stone or bit of shell in his shoe, it was stop, check, inspect, wax some sports tape on it or whatever it is.
Right away. Take care of your feet.
Yeah, take care of your feet.
Care. They're your most valuable asset out there. I mean, nothing works if your feet aren't working.
Yeah. We're going to move gears now, and we're going to talk about one of your favourite albergues that stand out for you along your way. It could be on your first one with your son Matthew, on your second one with your wife Chrissy. A favourite albergue, and tell us why. Maybe there's a story attached to that, a specific memory. Tell us why you'd recommend that albergue to the listeners.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And full disclosure here, with Matthew, is very important to give him that experience of staying in the albergues and albergs, just to, again, meet the community of the world, right? And with Chrissy, when we went back in the fall for our 25th anniversary, there's no way she's going to stay in an albergue. Like, she needs a private room.
I thought that was
right?
coming, yeah.
And so, we were staying at the Parador when we could, and that kind of thing. It was a celebration, and
of course,
it didn't make a lot of sense to rough it. And she's raised 5 kids. Our 5 kids, she's earned champagne in the evenings and spas along the way. So
especially
it was
after
a different
so
experience.
Far, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So Matthew, you kind of got to toughen him up, and I'd say so. The albergues are where you form your Camino families. By and large, it's in those evenings, and there's so many of them that we stayed in. But probably every 4 or 5 nights, we'd get a private room just to really get a good night's sleep, and have a little bit better accommodations. But one that kind of comes to mind is really in Villafranca, Montes de Oca. That's about 250 kilometers into the Camino. You're still outside, haven't reached Burgos yet, but you've been bumping into the same people on the Camino, and you kind of get this pace, as you know, Bradley. You kind of walk at this pace, and the people that are walking at your pace are kind of the people you keep bumping into. And we did our Camino extremely fast. We got Santiago people were kind of, really, are you sure? We left on June 30th, and we arrived on Sunday, July 24th. Saturday, July 23rd is when we arrived in Santiago. So we did it in 24 days, sorry. And but by then we'd kind of met, this group of 5, 6, 7 people that were moving at our pace, and kept seeing them day in and day out. So it was a rural pension called San Anton Abad, and that was in Villafranca, Montes de Oca, and you can find it in the Brierley Guide. But it was albergue in nature, like a lot of pensions are, but it, no top bunks, and that top bunk is just hard for us older guys to climb into it, in the evenings after walking.
Quite squeaky and noisy as well sometimes.
Oh, there was noisy there, all that. And so all the beds were kind of wood frames. They were all on the ground, at just 6 inches off the ground. It was like, oh, this was very, very nice. And it was clean. And, and I'd tell you another albergue that hardly anybody mentions, but it's your first night in Roncesvalles. It's the nicest, cleanest, newest, of all the amenities. It's, and again, there you just meet a lot of people that have just had this experience that you did, come and, out of St. John, and this monumental hike. I mean, it's just an amazing hike to physically accomplish, to accomplish that in the first day of the Camino, to go up and over and all the way to Roncesvalles. So that albergue too was very, very nice. But I think the reason in San Antonio Abad that I mentioned there, that albergue, that pension there, that's really where a lot of our Camino global community started to form. That's where, hey, we've run into each other enough. Let's share our contacts on WhatsApp. If we get separated, we're gonna try and reconnect, start talking about, looking forward to Santiago together and all of that, which we all subsequently did. And that group, we're still together on WhatsApp. We've got our friend Janet from Sweden, Friedrich from Germany. We've got Pedro from Madrid, and Nina from Slovenia. We've got folks from Italy. My son Matt. There's just a bunch of us that kind of walked these segments together, and that was like, your people I want to continue this pace with, and we've kind of found an alignment or a connection that you guys were real interesting, and so that's where that took place for me. That's why it was important.
I think what you said there as well, Jason, it really mirrors the many different Caminos I've had where I've gone on my own and I've stayed exclusively only in the albergs, and where I've wanted to be sociable, and I've managed to meet people from all over the world, just as you did. And I've also been on Caminos with my wife where we've mixed it up and we've stayed in hotels to get that privacy and that good night's sleep. And then after a while, I started to feel like we were missing out, that we were, not meeting those people, and that's what really enriches the Camino. So you've had both of those with your wife Chrissy, who you walked with last fall on your 25th anniversary, and also obviously I love the way you said you wanted Matthew to get that experience to be in contact with people from all over the world and broaden his horizons that way, and stay in the albergues was a really, really nice way for him to do that. And the two you recommended was the one in Roncesvalles, which would be if you're coming from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, that would be your first night, and in Villafranca, Montes de Oca, and that was San Anton de Abad. And just as a completely useless piece of information, Villafranca de Montes de Oca translates as Goose Town of the French Mountains. There you go.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, so we've got a couple of albergues, some recommendations there, and often it's those memories that make you remember those albergues more than the Spartan accommodation. And we're going to move on to talking about your kit list now. You've obviously done a couple of Caminos. You've got a bit of experience. Imagine you were to go tomorrow. What would be, apart from the obvious, your backpack, your shoes and your clothing, or your socks, what would be 3 things that you would want to take with you?
Well, just from a practical standpoint, you got to have poles, and I didn't do that on my first one. My son did. It really is helpful. I would also recommend Sea to Summit, 10-liter bags that keep your clothes separate. So maybe, your next day, change your clothes in one, your dirty clothes in another, so that you're not rooting through your backpack, especially if you're staying in albergues, to have some organization in your pack versus just kind of putting stuff in there, and to keep it separate, both from a hygiene standpoint and practical standpoint. Respect others. If you're getting up earlier than other people, it's good to just have your stuff organized. And I think those Sea to Summit bags are really good. You get those in 5, 10, 15 liter. They're waterproof. They're really good. So if they're wet from sweat or whatever, you've just got your stuff separated and organized. And for me, a journal is super important. Don't leave home with, for a Camino without it. It's a place to gather my thoughts. I think, I spend a little bit of time each night reviewing the Brierley Guide on where we've been, and then also looking forward to the next day of some of the history of where we're going. And then part of my mental thing that I talked about, mental prep and everything. I'm a writer. I like to capture my thoughts. That's always been important. People might do that on their phone, and that's fine too as well. But I like to, jot down by hand kind of the different things that I've experienced, what's kind of stuck out through the day, lessons learned, kind of encounters that I had, that sort of thing. And also in my journal, before I go, a big piece of my why is kind of the intentionality of why I'm walking. And so I've got a prayer list of people that, have said, hey, carry these along with you. And so some of the physical and mental, and like I said, the spiritual intersection there, like reviewing, who's asked me to pray, sort of friend that's struggling with the sickness or whatever. And then when it gets tough, you're out there and you're, maybe it's on the Meseta, or maybe it's a particular climb. And there's a day where there's a particularly tough climb, and you're going up this climb here. And it happened to be the day that my friend's dad was having a knee and hip replacement. I said, well, I'll offer this day for, up this climb here for him. He's going through a lot. And so that's a big piece of my why as well. And I keep all that in my journal.
That's really, really, really nice. So you're not only on course physically on the trip and your journey towards Santiago, but you're staying close and true to the reasons why you wanted to walk it and who you're walking it for.
Here's the other trick about the journal. I've never seen anybody else do this, but we figured it out probably about 2-3 days, maybe 3 or 4 days into our Camino. And I think everybody, well, if you ask, what's your most prized possession coming out of the Camino, everybody loves, their our pilgrim's passport with the cellos, right? It's just all the different colors and the unique stamps and everything. We all proudly display those. Our Compostelas are certainly awesome to, your certificate of completion, but your pilgrim's passport is really a cool collectible thing. It's something you earned. It's not, it's not a trinket you buy. It's not a t-shirt. It's like, hey, I paid some dues for that. Well, in my journal, every place we stayed, just like our pilgrim's passport, I started getting that stamped. And so my journal is really cool. It's got all these places where I was each night to help me reflect. And so it's cool thumbing through your journal. So I'd encourage people that use journals everywhere you go and get your pilgrim passport stamped, get your journal stamped as well.
That's a really nice idea, and it reminds me of something one of our guests a couple of episodes back, David Talon from Toronto. He got his own stamp made, so and it had his contact details on the stamp. So when he met people, he would just stamp their credentials, or we just stamp anything piece of paper they've got, and they would have David Talon stamp and his personal stamp and his contact details, which is a really nice idea.
Awesome.
And that way, whenever you're writing in your journal as well, you know exactly where you were. So it's a really nice way to record as well. And as someone who takes my own journal along the way, and I always get into the habit of writing my journal when I'm eating my pilgrim meal during the afternoon after I finish walking, just while I'm waiting for the food to kind of come, order the food and get writing. So I love that. And the other thing I picked out really was the really good idea was the Sea to Summit bag, separating your dirty, sweaty clothes from your clean clothes, being organised in your backpack. So really nice tips there. I'd like to ask you now, if I may, Jason, about a favourite city, town or village you'd recommend the listeners visit along the way, and tell the listeners. I went into proper Cockney accent there. Tell them why you recommend.
Okay, so I've got a couple, and allow me this license. Pamplona is huge for me. I'm educated by the Jesuits. Graduated from one of our 28 Jesuit universities here in the U.S., and St. Ignatius is the founder of the Jesuits, and he's a Basque saint, and just his charism was the spiritual exercises and then education. So they founded all these great universities throughout the world since he founded the Jesuits back in 1540. But before he became, this wonderful great saint that, all these colleges and universities are founded behind, in Pamplona, he was a soldier. And in 1521, he was wounded outside the city gates, defending the city. And in this battle, his leg was shattered by a cannonball. And so St. Ignatius and his history around Pamplona, that's where he had his conversion to the faith. And then subsequently, gathered together St. Francis Xavier and all these guys. And the Jesuits were founded because of this conversion. So as you walk towards Pamplona and up into the city gates, it's a huge piece of my kind of spiritual DNA, and I just love the city. It's the right size city. It's a young city. It's got university there. It's just a really, really cool. So in terms of big towns, Pamplona is significant. I named Matthew, who walked the Camino, of our 5 kids. His middle name is Ignatius, after St. Ignatius Loyola. So that Pamplona is near and dear to me, and obviously Hemingway and spending time there. The sun also rises, and just Pamplona is just rich with kind of a connection to me personally. And then one town Matthew and I walked through that I said, man, I just got to stay here next time. But we just trucked through, had breakfast, and it just grabbed me in its beauty and drew me in, was Molina Seca. We'd stayed up the hill. We had done a monster day that day. We went from Astorga to El Acebo, so a 37-kilometer day. And then El Acebo, we went all the way to Cacabelos, which was another 30-kilometer day. And we kind of passed through Molina Seca and didn't stay in it. But I said, it was so beautiful. The church, the little river that ran through, it was quaint.
The church by the river, by the bridge. Yeah.
Right, by the bridge, and then you turn left, you go over the bridge, and that town is just, it encapsulates Europe to me, and just, I love it. And so Chrissy and I got to stay there. We made it a point where El Acebo up above is wonderful, and we made some really cool connections up there. And you're up there in the mountains, but again, a pretty rough climb down into Molina-Seca, and then it gets kind of easy into Ponferrada there. But Molina-Seca was beautiful, and we're really, really glad that on our second Camino, we got to stay there and just enjoy, dinner there, and just beautiful, beautiful setting.
So Pamplona, obviously for the personal, spiritual, religious significance it holds for you. And it's also, like you said, a really, really nice city. Our guest in the last episode, Jose Marie Ardanath, actually is from Pamplona, and he talks, raves about the food as well. So as well as the reasons you mentioned, there's some great food in Pamplona. Molina-Seca is absolutely beautiful as well. It's one of the places that I would recommend people stay, and one of the places I would definitely want to stay if I went back, because I walked through there early morning, just like you said.
Grab breakfast. It was great. But
I did the same as you. I went from Astorga to El Acebo. From El Acebo to, I think it's Cacabelos is next from there, if I'm not mistaken. So I followed in your footsteps as well.
Great.
And so two great recommendations there. And now what we're going to do, just before we're going to talk more about your own personal Camino and the spiritual significance for you, I'm going to launch into some quick fire questions. And then we'll get back to, like I say, the main discussion. So what would be your favorite Camino blog or book? I'm not a Facebook guy. I'm not a big social media guy. So I would say in terms of blogs and books, I'm more kind of visual. So I'm going to kind of pass on those and say Camino Connection Experience would be a movie or a documentary. And I've since got to know these guys, or Patrick and Justin from the movie I'll Push You. I just think their story is so inspirational, and they do a remarkable job on that documentary of what the Camino and pilgrimage encapsulates for me, this whole spirit of accompaniment and, doing life's journey together. And for your listeners who aren't familiar with their story, I can't recommend that show enough. And I hope you are, Bradley. But Justin he's got a neuromuscular or autoimmune disease that is similar in nature to ALS. It's caused him to live his life in a wheelchair. And his best friend, Patrick, when Justin decided to do the Camino, said, I'll push you. And they rigged up a wheelchair and they did the whole Camino Frances. And so for the people who haven't been on the Frances or aren't familiar with the Camino, the story will bring you to tears. There's plenty of good books, and I've read a lot of good books. The Great Way Westward Walk. I'm looking forward to yours. I haven't read it, and I do. I gobble all of that stuff up. So there's lots of really good books and resources out there. But for a visual look at the Camino, I'll Push You is a remarkable story. And I think if you watch it, people are going to say, I got to go figure out a way to go do that. So definitely look up I'll Push You. And if I'm not mistaken, there's a book version as well. Or am I wrong?
There is.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
No,
so
it's a movie and a book.
Right.
Yep.
So great stuff. You answered two questions in one there. Thanks, Jason. So that was obviously the I'll Push You. That's a Camino blog, a Camino book and a film. And you mentioned it was the Camino Connection Experience. So look that up. What would be your favorite food and or drink on the Camino?
Food far and away is pulpo. Our second Camino got truncated. We got some bad news in Las Herrias, just short of Osabrero, and Osobreau is kind of where you start to arrive at Galicia, and that's where you find your pulpo. And I was looking forward to pulpo the whole way. And we had it on our first Camino. Just that it's so authentic. It's a great. I love the paprika. I love the way they prepare it. I like watching them. You can go into the shops and watch them cook pulpo. And then kind of guilty pleasure, and I would never do this here in the U.S. because I'm not 8 years old anymore, but I drink Fanta almost every day, orange Fanta, because it's just kind of a thing over there. And I don't know why, but having some, refined sugar, when you're walking that many kilometers and burning that many calories, I felt like, hey, I can, this is really refreshing. Yeah. But I would not in a million years order an orange Fanta. I'm 49 years old now, and I wouldn't consider it here in the U.S., but on the Camino, for some reason, it's fine. And then I'd also say another just awesome thing are the almond cakes, and I think they're called like the Santiago or the St. James cake, and it's just this little tart made with almond flour, and my wife has found the recipe, and it's she makes them for us all the time, and she's got the little powdered sugar thing that makes the cross of St. James on it, so it's a memory. So we love that. And then my son Matthew, he would tell you that the tortilla bocadillos, the Spanish tortillas, and we make those all the time as a family now too. He threatened the world's food supply while he was out there. He ate tortilla bocadillos at a rate I couldn't imagine. At 17, their metabolism's a little different than us old duffers, so it was kind of fun to watch him live off of that. But there's great food out there, and I would, I'd say this: you get there are some disappointments. You get to some of the towns, and it's kind of almost like a warmed up version of the same menu that is out there. And I can't remember the company sign, but it's almost like a lot of the offerings. I'd encourage people to go to a little bit off the beaten path bars and stuff, and try and find things that are more authentic. And and that can certainly be a pilgrim's menu, but really try and figure out what the locals are eating, and that's where we had the best experience ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, the for those that don't know, the pulpo is the octopus, and it often comes with like a bit of red onion and potato and paprika sprinkled on top. The tarta Santiago, which is the Santiago cake, and everyone knows what a bit of orange Fanta is, and you treat yourself to your favorite soft drink along the way. So great stuff. One thing you didn't need and wouldn't take again.
I was pretty diligent on the front end. So I really, the only thing I'd say that I found I didn't need, but we were prepared. We brought blow up mattresses and good gear. We geared up at the right places, so it didn't take up a ton of space, and it wasn't a ton of weight. But not knowing what to expect, and hey, would you ever end up needing to blow up a mattress and sleep outside under the stars one night because things were full? And there were a couple times where we got to that point where it was almost, that scramble for beds and all that kind of thing. There was one night where we almost needed it, but we never did. And I would trust that, hey, I'm not going to need it, so I'll probably just forego it. Would be, even though it was small, it was a little blow up mattress, because I didn't need it.
So forego the blow-up mattress. No, I mean, the likelihood of you needing that or a tent along the Camino is very slim, because it's not like the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Coast Trail where you're going to be camping out wild. Yeah.
So well, the infrastructure is so well done, and
it's really well
served.
Yeah. Okay. And one place you wished you'd stayed over but didn't get the chance, and you would if you were to go again?
Boy, that's a really good question. I'd probably say and I haven't been there, but I'll put this on my list, was Murcia. We went to Finisterre, but my wife and I were going to go to Murcia this time once we finished in Santiago. So that's still on my list of somewhere I need to go. And I appreciate, Bradley. I mean, I'll do, God willing, the Porto, Northern Way, Camino Norte.
Yeah.
I want to do that, but I love the same experience. I like once you're familiar with something, if I'm able, I'll continue to do the Francis, several more times, but I'll do those others. But there's so many different things, and your question really kind of speaks to the heart of that. There, as you go along that way, each Camino is different, and that's a big lesson I learned with Chrissy is you can't replicate this magic that Matthew and I experienced because it's just different, and there's different places, and you remember. And she was shocked by what I had remembered. I have a pretty good memory. It's just a piece of once I experience something, I know where it's at relative to other things and all of that kind of thing. And I would say, hey, coming up here, there's what a really good place to grab some breakfast, and it'll be up here on the right. And we would stop in there, 2 kilometers up the road from where we were walking. And she was happy to know that I knew those things. But I think with that experience too, you're kind of mentally cataloging these places at each Camino. Hey, I can walk the same route, and the familiarity is an invitation. It's welcoming, it's warm, but there's a different experience out there as well. So I'd continue to do the Francis and just stop in different places that I've jotted down, and you see is somewhere I'm going to go.
Okay, so for those that don't know, Murcia, just to educate those that aren't familiar with the area, it's on the coast and it's in Galicia. So once you've been to Santiago, you've got a choice to kind of go to Finisterre or Murcia. You can go to Finisterre first and then go to Murcia, or go to Murcia first and then Finisterre. But I spoke to Jose Maria Ardanath, who's the host for the El Camino People podcast, and he said that he absolutely loves Murcia because it's a little bit quieter than Finisterre, because it's not as famous, but it's still got the same magic. So there's a bit more peace, a bit more tranquility, and he said he would choose Murcia over Finisterre. So you'll find on the coast as well. So that's definitely a place I'm going to visit next as well. What would you say is your favorite thing about the Camino?
I would say for me, it's just the opportunity to continue to grow. We don't stop that until the end, right? We're always growing and discovering something about yourself. And I think if you just approach the Camino with a spirit of openness, the people that you meet out there and what they teach you about you, kind of some of your shortcomings too. For me, it's patience, and so taking really long walks and not having to constantly churn over, hey, what's next, but just be present in the day that I'm walking and where I'm at right when I'm at. And is it walking with my wife or my son and just being present to them? Those are gifts that the Camino offers that very few other experiences in life really lend themselves to. But those lessons, once you learn them, are really apt when you come back and apply them. And I think that's really, most pilgrims will tell you, I think once you've done a pilgrimage of this significance, you kind of come back and you really want to take those, what I would call a pilgrim's disposition. What are those lessons that you learned out there, and how do you incorporate that into your daily life? And to me, it's present in the moment, because that's what the Camino offers you. For a lot of people, it's simplicity and what do you really need, and those sort of things. And those are absolutely, couldn't agree anymore. But just the present moment is what the Camino's gift to me is.
I love that answer. I really love that answer. And I think I only got to walk a week last December with my wife because that's all we had free. But I made a point to make sure my phone was off, because when I'm at home, my phone's always pinging and there's always things going on. And the marriage of movement with mind, it puts you into that moment, that present moment that you talk about, and it slows you right down, and all of a sudden you find your patience just magically extending. You become more of a patient person. You're sitting down to eat lunch, you're not checking your phone, you're actually just sitting there with a bocadillo in your hand, and you're present in every single time you chew. Just something as simple as that. And with that, it releases so much satisfaction and happiness, and that's one of my favorite things too.
I think that's kind of what we were built for. And
I agree.
we
Yeah, I
have
agree.
distracted ourselves with all of these things. And
Mm.
I don't want to go on a treatise about all this stuff is bad, because
No.
it's not. It's connected the world in a beautiful way. But,
Mm.
you can enter into some real relationships out there. And I see that because people are intentional about where they're at. And it's the sight, it's the smell, it's that flower, and I find people taking pictures of flowers or
Mm.
trees and that kind of thing. There's a famous tree on the Meseta that, stands out there by the middle of this, nowhere by itself, and everybody's like notices those things. And if you're in a car and you're going 100 kilometers an hour, or a bus or whatever, the way we live our daily lives, I mean, you just kind of go trucking through life. And the Camino, as you're walking it, you're just invited into this pace that is really a great lesson for life that can help you in so many different ways, by slowing down and just being present to the situation that's offered to you right then and there. And that's a great lesson.
That's really, really nice way to put it. And just summing all of that up that we just said is just the slowing down and moving into something that a way of living for which we're probably programmed our bodies and minds to be present and to experience everything we're doing. And I love that marriage of mind and body that the Camino brings to us. So thank you very much for reminding me of that.
Yeah.
It's reminding me that I need to go and start doing that again because I've been so busy. Okay. Last question of the quick fire round, which has become a more exploratory round, but that's all good. We talked about slowing down. Who needs quick fire rounds? So maybe the hardest part of the Camino for you.
Boy, that is a great question. And I'm going to say this: it was the end of the Camino. And there's two elements I'd like to tell you. The hardest part is for those of us who've walked it from St. John to all the way to Santiago. There's a little bit of a parochial kind of thing that happens to us. It's not our best version or best nature, but the Camino changes. I mentioned there's kind of these sub Caminos. There's the new, the first part is you go all the way to Burgos and you get out the Meseta. That's a different Camino. And then Galicia, I think, is a different Camino than the Meseta. And as you get to Sarria, I can't remember what the stat is, but it's greater than 70% of all people start in Sarria because everybody's kind of looking for that Compostela. But there's a little bit, the Camino's nature, it changes. You're getting close to the end. You get all the people with day packs and that are just doing short versions. And there's a little bit of, and maybe this is just me, but I've certainly found it within our group and we had some laughs about it, but it does, in kidding around, it does point out some serious kind of character flaws in me anyway. Is you get a little bit judgmental about people about, hey, there's this race for the beds, whereas days earlier you sleep kind of anywhere you want. And now all of a sudden people who have all this energy, who hadn't walked 400 more miles like you had, and they're just out here for a short period of time, you kind of feel like, hey, you didn't earn this, and that's just the wrong spirit, right? Who are we to kind of judge that? Maybe that's, like you said, you only had a week to walk with your wife. I mean, everybody's Camino, whether it's 1 day, 3 days, 30 days, or 60 days, it's their Camino. And but we kind of kidded around about that and kind of said, like in the U.S., when you run these marathons, there's these pace setters. If you want to run a certain time, you just kind of group up with the person who's got the sign that if you want to run a 4-hour marathon, it's, you can group up around that sign. So we should be carrying these signs that say, hey, I started at St. John, therefore we get rights into the albergues, just like the walkers do over the bicyclists. And we kind of laugh again about the nature of that, about our Camino isn't any more special than anybody else's. And it kind of pointed out to me like some areas that I gotta loosen up on. But I will say that the Camino at that point also turned into more of a carnival and festive and celebratory, and it wasn't as peaceful, it wasn't as quiet, it wasn't as intentional in a lot of ways. It was distracted is probably the best way to say that. And then the second element of that, I said, is twofold. So the Camino's nature kind of changed just because there's so many people. If you would walk, before that, and you saw I don't know, 50 pilgrims a day, you might see 500 a day in those last, in the last 100 Ks. Just wall to wall people out there. And so the crowded nature and distracted nature of the Camino is one. But the other piece, and the hardest part, I'd say, this is the second piece of the hardest part question, is the Camino's coming to a conclusion, and you really get acutely aware that this experience that you've just done, and most people will never do something this big in their life, and the fact that you got to do it and that you're attentive to how big of a physical accomplishment that is, to walk across Spain from France to the west coast of Spain. It's a huge accomplishment. It's something to be ultra proud of, and you've learned a lot about yourself, and there's almost this mourning or this sense of loss about this is coming to an end, and I'm really used to this, and I really like it, and I don't want it to end. So I think that, and again, there's the lesson of the Camino too, that its final lesson in a lot of ways is life is always changing. It always requires you to let go. It always requires you, if you want to have the best experiences, to be open to new things. And part of that is saying goodbye to the Camino. But it's really, really hard for the people who've walked the whole thing and paid that price. And you see it in the emotions of people. But for me, saying goodbye to it was really hard, and I wasn't prepared that first time for those last couple of days of, wow, this thing is winding down, and I don't really enjoy how that feels, if that makes sense, Brad.
Absolutely. The year after my first Camino, when I walked from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to Finisterre, was the hardest year of my life, because I found out the person that went, this is going to sound very cheesy, but the person that went didn't come back. The life I walked back to, or I came back to, didn't fit the person that came back. So I had to make a load of changes, which I wasn't really aware of how to make. So I understand how that feels, the fact that this big adventure is over. You said you had some troubles with it. For those that maybe were like you and I, they're going to come back from this amazing trip, this once-in-a-lifetime trip for many people. Can you offer any advice to make that transition smoothly, and so it doesn't have to be such... I think it crushed my spirit coming home. I have to say, it was tough for me. How can people make that adjustment?
It's a fantastic question, one I wasn't prepared for, but I would tell you, let me take a crack at it. Be open to that change. And if I had to set a metric, and I'm a business guy at heart, so I measure everything and kind of build stuff, and it's just kind of, I can't divorce that from the way that I think. And if I had to put some measurements out there of the Camino, if what I would say a successful Camino is somebody who has gone on that and has come back changed, and embrace that change and welcome that change and be open to that change. And that may make that easier. And I think all of us who have done that experience, most of us who have done that experience, will certainly feel, different priorities, different things that matter to you. Maybe it's relationships, maybe it's, how you spend your time, what you're called to do. There's big questions a lot of people are wrestling with out there. And that's a beautiful thing, but be open to that change and don't be afraid of it. So don't mourn it, listen to it, kind of figure out what it's telling you, because I'm a spiritual and religious guy, and that kind of is something I spend a lot of time kind of thinking about, and I think I'm being tugged into or pulled into these ways where that's an area I got to spend a little bit more time kind of processing and internalizing to be a little bit better version of me, and to we're all going to grow. It's just a function of how do you want to grow, and to let the Camino change you, and don't waste that gift. I mean, that's the tragedy of the Camino, is if you experience it and you come back and you just kind of fall into your old ho-hum way of life. Not, and a lot of us have to, but how do you approach it? No one should go to the Camino and just say, hey, I'm going back. I'm quitting my job. This isn't for me. And I mean, we can't have a world that, doesn't function because we, have all adopted this kind of vagabond pilgrimage lifestyle. That's not the point of it. But how can you do what you do every day, whether you're a doctor or an accountant or whatever that you do for your vocation and a living? How can you do that more intentionally with that pilgrim's disposition, what you learned about yourself, those lessons out there of slowing down, of friendship, of, relationship, of serving others, of being open to gifts that people give you like dogma, and, being better at receiving those things, whatever those lessons are. And again, that's to me where the journal really comes in, because and no knocking people that don't write or don't want to. They experience things differently than I do, but I'm really intentional about trying to capture those things as part of my daily examination of conscience. Like, what did I learn? Where did I fall short? Where are the lessons? And if you bring that back, the Camino will have changed you. And I think you'll be a better accountant or a better business person, a better nurse, a better, whatever your vocation that you do for a living. And maybe that helps you out quite a bit.
I really love what this conversation has brought to the listeners, because the focus of the podcast mainly is talking about the physical preparation. But I love what you brought to this conversation, Jason, because what I'm taking away is that all the stuff that you've helped with, those practical tips, but for when we are on the Camino, it's about slowing down and being more intentional, and then taking that approach into our post-Camino life, whatever it will be. Slow down, be more intentional. And that's what I'm going to take away from this conversation. And it's reminded me of, like I said before, what I took away from my last Camino, which was, even though it was only a week, was that the marriage of mind and body, and that is actually slowing down and being more intentional. And I really like that. So thanks for reminding me of that. Thanks for bringing that perspective to the
Bradley,
listeners. Yeah.
How you came back, and here's what I wrote in my journal before I left. And maybe this helps people kind of put a bow on our conversation that might have deviated from some of that. And I hope there's some good physical and gear and that kind of tips. But, when I talked about the mental side and you said you came back somewhat changed, what I wrote in mine, and this drove the conversation of my Camino family once we got to Santiago, and we had a couple of dinners, subsequent nights together, talking about this. What'd you bring on the Camino, and what'd you find out here, and then what'd you leave out on the Camino? And those notes were in my journal, kind of in that theme of like, are you open to change? What do you learn about yourself? And so it's not just this physical journey of, gear and all that. It's this wonderful opportunity of slowing down, and the lessons that you learn, what friendships. And I think those questions right there kind of can help center some of your thinking as you walk along that. So that's what draws me back to it. I was scheduled to go back in June with my twin daughters. I mentioned we had 5 kids, and my oldest was graduating college here in the middle of this mess, and our Matthew's the next one. He's going to be a senior next year, and our third's at University of great school here in the U.S. And our twins have just always been these pilgrims. They've done these walks here in the U.S. and they really wanted to go on the Camino, and that's what I'm hoping to give them is, again, kind of that lesson of slowing down, and that life's, this big meeting of relationships, and this big journey that we're all on, and pilgrimage is just a wonderful corollary for the life that we live. And if you adopt that pilgrim spirit that the Camino teaches us, boy, it can take you a long way.
Just before we go, Jason, do you want to just mention where the listeners can find you? And obviously you said you, when we spoke before, you said you chair Kapaun's Men, and just give us a little bit of background about that and where the listeners can find you if they'd like to find out more.
Sure. So I chair one of the philanthropic works that I work on is a group called Kapaun's Men, and it's men's formation group that's really centered around the life of Father Emil Kapaun, who was a Army chaplain. He's the highest decorated Army chaplain in United States Army history, and was captured in the Korean War and died in a prisoner of war camp over there. And his cause is up for canonization in the Catholic Church. So he's being considered as a saint. And he's a parish priest from Pilsen, Kansas, here, just 60 miles north of Wichita. And kind of his example of service to others and the life that he led and the soldiers that he served with during the Korean War, we make his case pretty well known. And that's the pilgrimage I referred to a couple times here in the U.S. We do this walk every first week of June, and we've done it for 11 years. And now with the coronavirus, obviously that's in question whether or not we're going to do it. But you can find all of that information at capensmen.com. And I'd also mention to you that, and if this is of any help to your pilgrims as well, Bradley can get a hold of my email, and I'll send it to Bradley. But again, I mentioned kind of my business, the way I think about things, and over-engineer stuff. But my daughter, since they couldn't go on the Camino in June, and travel's effectively shut down the world, and the Camino is kind of resting right now, and they may or may not reopen this year. They only have a summer break, so it's obviously not going to happen this year. But they, in the middle of homeschool and doing all this online coursework, I built a little spreadsheet that's got every city, and I mean every tiny town, the hundreds of towns we all walk through on the Frances, and the kilometer marks between each one. And so my daughters on March 17th started walking, and they've been very aggressive at their pace, and in spite of their schoolwork, they're walking about 11, 12 miles a day. And each night I plug into the spreadsheet, and it just looks up, a little formula looks up where they're at on the Camino, and then they kind of flip open their browser and take a look, and that's what Mola Seca looks like. And today they'll reach Porto Marin, another great town on the Camino. So they're almost done here, coming up into May, and I think it'll be just short of 45 days with schoolwork and everything. I couldn't be any more proud of them as well. So if that's a resource, Bradley, I'll get you that spreadsheet, and maybe during this time when the Camino's resting, if people want to kind of virtually walk the Camino, just go out and walk in and again, another lesson the Camino teaches you may not have to go to Spain to do this thing. You can, if you adopt that pilgrim's disposition, you can do it in your own, backyard or sandbox, wherever you live. And, but just walk those miles, and then you can kind of say, that's where I'm at out on the Camino, where I'm walking it. So if that's of help, we'll get that to you.
Well, first of all, let's talk about Kapaun's Men. So for those that want to find out more about that, it's KAPAUNS men.com. So if you want to find out more about that, then you can contact Jason on that website. And that virtual Camino sounds absolutely amazing. I'm sure your daughter's really enjoying it, and it'll be actually some very good training for those when they eventually get to go. So if you wouldn't mind sending me that resource, if you're open to that, I can definitely share that with the listeners, or we can share it in whichever way you're comfortable to share that, and obviously with your credit on that. And that would be a wonderful, fun resource, and a little bit of a substitute for those that have had to cancel their Caminos. So that would be amazing. Thank you so much.
Of course, you send me your email offline there, and I'll email you a copy of that Excel, and you can get it to any of your listeners. You can send it out, and I'll send you some instructions. If people aren't familiar with how to work a spreadsheet, I'll give you a step-by-step guide on how to do it.
Right, good stuff. Well, I want to wish you for your next pilgrimage in the one you're going to do closer to home. I'd like to wish you, next time you go on that, a buen camino. Also, for your next Spanish Camino as well, we're going to wish you Ultria, which is the Camino motto, should I say, move forward with courage. And just to thank you so much for this lovely, spiritually guided, spiritually centered conversation. It's been really, really nice. So thank you so much, Jason.
Really enjoyed it. It was great making your acquaintance. Thanks for the work that you're doing, sharing about the Camino, and getting all these listeners introduced to it. It's great work. Those of us who have done it, love it. And thanks to you for sharing it.